Goodbye, little orphan. Don't ever come back. There's no place for you here. It happened on my 18th birthday. Mandy, my foster parents' daughter, stood at the front door and sent me off with a cruel smile. That was the day I was thrown out of the house I had lived in for 10 years. When I came home from school that afternoon, my foster mother, Susan, was waiting for me in the living room. On the table sat an old suitcase and a sealed envelope. "Sit down, Julia," Susan said coldly. "From today, you're legally an adult. Our responsibility for you is over." I sat down, confused. "What do you mean?" "It means," Mandy chimed in cheerfully as she came down the stairs, "you don't need to be here anymore. You're no longer suitable for our family." Susan pushed the envelope toward me. "This is your college fund. What your parents left behind for you, or at least what was left." "What do you mean what was left?" I asked. "Oh, Julia, you really don't get it," Susan sighed. "Think of all the costs we've covered for you over the past 10 years: food, electricity, medical care, education. All of that was deducted from your inheritance. But my parents left the money for me." "They did," Mandy interrupted. "But there's a thing called childcare cost. After calculating 18 years of it, this is what's left. Honestly, we probably spent more than we should have." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was just enough to cover 4 years of college tuition, an absurdly small amount considering the fortune my parents had left. "You need to clear out your room by tonight," Susan added. "Mandy is starting college this fall and needs a bigger space for studying." "But where am I supposed to go?" "That's your problem," Susan replied, completely unmoved. "You're 18. Time to be independent." "That's how it works for everyone." I stood up, trying to protest. "But I'm still in high school. I have 2 more months until graduation." "You'll manage?" Mandy said with a mocking grin. "You just gotta leave. Maybe rent an apartment? You've got money, don't you?" I rushed to my room in despair. Half of it was already packed up. My belongings had been stuffed into cardboard boxes. Mandy's new furniture had already been moved in. By evening, as I finished packing, Susan gave her parting words. "This is the reality, Julia. You're no longer part of our family. Don't expect any future contact. You have your life. We have ours." I was utterly alone. With nothing but a suitcase and a few $1,000s in checks, I stepped out into the cold rain. And I made a vow to myself. Never again would I rely on anyone's mercy. I would make something of myself, with my own strength. I didn't yet understand what true family meant, or that my worth wasn't tied to someone else's approval. But this painful experience would become the foundation of something far greater. The beginning of my resilience. The self-reliance and unyielding spirit I gained from hardship became the very weapons that would shape my future. My parents, Brian and Kathy, died in a car accident when I was 8. They loved me deeply and had dreamed of a bright future for me. But everything ended that night. When the police showed up at the front door to deliver the news of the accident, my life was changed forever. In a single moment, I went from being a beloved daughter to a parentless orphan. 10 years ago, after their death, I was taken in by my father's sister Susan and her husband Thomas. They became my foster parents. At the time, Susan ran a small beauty salon, not very successful. Thomas owned a mid-sized construction company, heavily reliant on a partnership with my father's architecture firm. They had a daughter my age, Mandy, and it was clear from the start that I wasn't welcome. From the very first day, their coldness was impossible to ignore. "Julia, you'll use the basement room." "Don't bother Mandy," Susan said. Discussions about my inheritance happened behind closed doors. My father's siblings gathered and, claiming that I was too young to manage money, divided most of his estate among themselves. "Let's at least leave enough for Julia's college tuition," Susan suggested with a seemingly kind voice, but her calculating eyes betrayed her. "A child can't handle money. We'll raise her as our own. We'll manage the funds for her." And so, I became their child in name. In truth, most of my parents' estate was funneled into Susan's salon expansion and into Thomas's company for equipment upgrades. To grow our business using Brian's architectural legacy that would be the greatest tribute to him. Thomas said it himself during the family meeting. But what hurt even more was watching the memory of my parents being slowly erased. My family photos were replaced with new ones, as if my parents had never existed. My treatment at home deteriorated year after year. While Mandy was given new clothes and extracurricular activities, I was handed hand-me-downs and expected to be grateful. Mandy will take over the beauty salon one day, so it's important she develops her fashion sense, Susan used to say. You should just focus on your studies, Julia. That's what's best for you. Meanwhile, Thomas's construction company grew rapidly, thanks to the architectural plans and client list my father had left behind. Ironically, they were thriving off my parents' legacy and connections, yet I was never treated as part of the family. That poor girl is still traumatized by her parents' deaths, Susan would tell the neighbors. No matter how much love we show her, she just won't open her heart to us. So I poured myself into schoolwork. I saved every dollar I could from part-time jobs. I started spending more time at the library and avoided home as much as possible. But deep inside, I still hoped that one day they'd acknowledge and love me. That hope was shattered when I was kicked out on my 18th birthday. 10 years after being cast out of that house, I had built a life of my own working as an international attorney at Anderson Associates, one of Boston's top law firms. I had graduated at the top of my class from Harvard Law School and had begun building a name for myself in the field of Middle Eastern oil contracts. My apartment was small and modest, but every inch of it was mine. I carried my past silently, living as a woman who would never again depend on anyone. I had cut off all contact with Susan and the others. I had built a new life. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday. A man named Mohammed Al-Arabi walked into our firm. He was 35, heir to one of the largest oil empires in the Middle East. But I had no idea who he was that day. I'd like to discuss an oil exploration agreement, he said at the reception. His voice was marked by a soft, elegant blend of Arabic and English. I can assist you with that. International oil law is my specialty, I responded. We spent 2 hours in the conference room, and I was struck by Mohammed's intelligence and presence. Unlike many wealthy clients, he genuinely respected my expertise and treated me as an equal partner. You truly understand the law, he said with admiration. I just believe in justice. And fair deals, I replied. I believe in that too. When business is done with honor and benefits the community, it's worth pursuing. From that day on, we began seeing each other regularly. Mohammed never flaunted his wealth. He was always humble and thoughtful. In his presence, for the first time in my life, I felt I had met someone I could truly trust. 3 months later, one night, I gathered the courage to share my past. I told him everything. My parents' deaths, the betrayal by those who were supposed to love me, how I had been thrown out. The hardest part, I said, fighting back tears, wasn't just losing my parents. It was being abandoned by the people who were supposed to care. It made me wonder if I was simply unlovable. Mohammed took my hand and said softly, "They failed you, Julia. A child who loses her parents deserves protection and love, not exploitation." Those words thawed something frozen in my heart. For the first time, I believed it wasn't my fault. A year later, Mohammed proposed to me on a beach in Martha's Vineyard. As the sun set, he took my hand and said, "I love your strength, your intelligence, and your ability to find hope after hardship. You've changed how I see the world. Won't you walk the rest of this life with me?" We had a small wedding in Dubai. His family welcomed me with open arms. For the first time in my life, I knew what real family love felt like. His parents embraced me as their own daughter, and his sister Nadia became the sister I had always wished for. For 2 years, we lived between Boston and Dubai in a joyful rhythm. I continued my career, and Mohammed supported my independence wholeheartedly. Despite his wealth, I chose to keep working on my own terms. And yet, I deliberately never told my former foster family about the wedding. I didn't want Susan or Mandy tainting the life I had built. The love and trust I had found, this world I had created, had to be protected from their poison. Those 2 years were the most peaceful, fulfilling years of my life. I learned what true love meant. That family isn't blood, it's heart. But the past had a way of finding me when I least expected it. One Tuesday, during what had been a peaceful and happy married life, A cream-colored, luxurious envelope arrived at my door. The sender? The Watson Family Foundation. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was an invitation to a charity gala for Boston Children's Hospital. A handwritten note was tucked inside. "Julia, it's been so long. We miss you. Let's reconnect, Susan." After 12 years of complete silence, this sudden invitation from my foster mother left me stunned. But the most disturbing part, she knew my current address. For the past 12 years, I had deliberately severed all ties to my past and never once shared my new address with them. When I showed the letter to Muhammad, his expression darkened. "How do you think she found our address?" I asked nervously. Muhammad paused for a moment before replying. "I might have an idea. Last month, Forbes ran a small feature about our marriage. The headline was something like, 'Middle Eastern oil heir marries Harvard-educated international attorney.' I searched my memory. Yes, I remembered that article. It was a brief mention tied to the IPO of Muhammad's company, listing board members and noting our marriage. They mentioned your maiden name, that you graduated from Harvard Law, and that we currently live in Boston." My heart sank. So after she realized that I married you, she suddenly remembered I was family again. Muhammad nodded. "Unfortunately, yes. She never cared while you were a struggling student. But now that she knows you're married to a global oil magnate, she wants a reunion." I stared at the invitation in my hand as a rush of anger and sadness surged through me. For 12 years, she didn't even check if I was alive. But the moment she smells money. "Actually, that gala is being anonymously sponsored by a foundation I co-founded with a friend," he said. "I had no idea your family was involved. It's purely a coincidence." I understood instantly. Susan had researched Muhammad's background in detail, his wealth, his influence, and engineered this invitation, knowing it was his event. "Whatever her true intentions are," I said, my voice steady with resolve, "this might be my chance to finally close the door on that chapter. But this time, it'll be on my terms, not theirs." We made a careful plan. I would attend alone first. Muhammad would arrive later. This way, I could observe their true motivations. On the night of the gala, I wore my best emerald green gown and headed to the Four Seasons Hotel. A tangle of nerves and quiet confidence warred inside me, dread at seeing them again, but also pride in how far I'd come. But the first sign of trouble came at the reception desk. "Name, please?" the receptionist asked politely. "Julia Al-Arabi," I replied. She checked her tablet, then frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, Mom, but you're listed as Julia Watson, driver." My breath was caught. "That's a mistake. I was invited as a guest. I'm not sure what's going on." As the receptionist struggled, I suddenly heard familiar voices behind me. I turned to see Susan and Mandy approaching. "Oh, Julia," Susan exclaimed, putting on an exaggerated look of surprise. "It's been so long. I'm so glad you came." "Is there a problem?" the receptionist explained. "It seems this guest was listed under our driver roster." Mandy shook her head with a concerned smile. "Oh dear, that must be a clerical mix-up. Julia is our beloved family member. Certainly not a driver." Yes, Susan chimed in. "Just a silly mistake. She's absolutely a guest. Would you mind correcting that?" Looking bewildered, the receptionist nodded. "Of course. My apologies," she said, handing me a guest badge. "There we go," Mandy said sweetly. "What a shame being mistaken for a driver. Then again, I suppose it's not entirely unbelievable. Anyway, let's forget about it and head inside, shall we?" Her smile was tight, poisonous. I walked into the ballroom, trying to brush it off. Why was my name on the driver list? Still, because my foster mother and Mandy had helped clear it up, I tried to convince myself it must have been a simple mistake. But as I spoke more with Susan and Mandy, something felt off. On the surface, they seemed welcoming, but something about it felt rehearsed, almost like a performance. And then the unexpected happened. Susan stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight in support of Boston Children's Hospital. First, I'd like to thank our incredible staff, our organizers, our caterers, and of course, our wonderful drivers." She glanced around the room as she continued. "To our event planners, catering staff, and of course, our drivers. Oh, and speaking of which." Then her eyes landed directly on me. "We had a little mix-up tonight. One of our hired drivers seems to have accidentally wandered into the guest area. That woman right over there." She pointed directly at me. Gasps rippled through the room as dozens of eyes turned to stare. My face was drained of color. "Julia Watson," Susan said clearly. "You were scheduled to be one of tonight's drivers. What are you doing in the guest area?" I stood frozen. The mix-up at the reception desk hadn't been a mistake at all, it had been a deliberate trap. Could it be, Mandy added with a look of false concern, that Julia didn't realize she was hired as a driver tonight? Poor thing, she must be terribly confused. The crowd turned to look at me, some confused, some sympathetic, but among them were also those who were clearly entertained. "Oh dear," Susan continued. "Julia, my dearest daughter. Offering you a job was an act of family kindness. But it seems you misunderstood the dress code tonight." My heart pounded in my chest. So this was their plan all along. The invitation wasn't about reconciliation. It was about humiliating me publicly. "Security," Susan called out. "It seems our driver is in the wrong area. Please escort her to the parking zone, or, if she continues causing confusion, kindly remove her from the event." A security guard started walking toward me. Laughter and snide whispers began to ripple through the room. "She's always been delusional," said my cousin Dylan. "An orphan who never knew her place. I have a formal invitation," I tried to explain, voice trembling. Susan cut me off, waving a dismissive hand. It was ceremonial, not a real invitation. Mandy stood nearby, recording everything on her phone. "This is going to be gold for social media," she giggled. I struggled to maintain my composure, even as my heart cracked. But just as the guard reached out to take my arm, the doors to the ballroom flew open. Standing in the entryway, tall and commanding, were Mohammed Al-Arabi and Elon Musk. A wave of stunned silence washed over the room. Mohammed, regal and composed, radiated the authority of a global oil tycoon, and Elon's unmistakable presence electrified the atmosphere. "Julia," Mohammed's voice rang out clearly across the hall. They began walking toward me. I watched the faces around me shift from confusion to disbelief to sheer awe. No one had imagined that two of the world's most powerful businessmen would walk in and know me. "Julia, what's going on here?" Mohammed said again, his voice calm yet firm. He spoke to me with such familiarity that the crowd collectively gasped. The guard Victor immediately stepped back, releasing me and straightening his posture. "My apologies. There must have been some mistake." Susan scrambled forward, her voice trembling. "Mr. Al-Arabi, Mr. Musk, what an honor. I'm Susan Watson, the host of tonight's gala." Mohammed fixed her with a cold stare. "Mrs. Watson, I'm well aware of who you are." Then Elon stepped forward, addressing the entire room. "Everyone, allow me to introduce my friend and one of the most respected business leaders in the world, Mohammed Al-Arabi. And I must reveal something important." A hush fell once again. Actually, tonight's gala has been anonymously sponsored by a charity foundation co-founded by Mohammed and me. But given what we've witnessed, we've decided it's time to reveal ourselves. Susan visibly paled. She had just realized that the gala she had claimed to host was actually funded by her niece's husband and his world-famous partner. "And there's more," Mohammed continued. "The woman who was nearly escorted out a moment ago is my wife Julia Al-Arabi, a top graduate of Harvard Law School and an international attorney specializing in energy law." His words echoed across the room like thunder. Mandy, still holding her phone, quickly turned it off and shoved it into her purse. Around us, jaws dropped. Elon added with a smile, "Julia is also the legal advisor for our sustainable energy projects in the Middle East. Her integrity and expertise have earned our deepest respect." Susan tried to salvage the moment. "This is all just a misunderstanding. I knew Julia was married to you, of course. But we didn't know she'd be attending tonight. If we had. If you had, you would have treated her with dignity?" Mohammed interrupted. That is exactly the problem. A person's worth should never be measured by wealth or association, but by their character. Especially in families. As people around us recorded the entire scene on their smartphones, Mandy desperately tried to hide the fact that she had been mocking me just minutes earlier. Our foundation, Elon continued, will be reviewing its partnership with any organization that tolerates discrimination or humiliation. What Julia endured tonight violates everything we stand for. The entire energy of the room shifted. And in that moment I felt something inside me change too. My worth was never theirs to define. True family is not about blood. It's about mutual love and respect. 6 months after that night, my life had transformed in ways I never imagined. The gala wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Susan and Mandy initially flooded me with messages trying to control the damage. But I never responded. Blood ties meant nothing without loyalty or care. One day, I received a visit from Heather, my father's former law partner. She told me she had been searching for me since I disappeared at 18. She spoke of how deeply my parents, Brian and Kathy, had loved me. Your parents had plans to start a scholarship fund for orphaned children, Heather said through tears. They truly believed in helping those who had no one. Those words planted something powerful in my heart. Together with Mohammed, I founded the Brian Kathy Watson Orphan Advocacy Foundation. The purpose of the foundation was to provide legal protection and educational opportunities for children who had lost their parents to protect them from the kind of injustice I once endured. This isn't just about honoring your parents' memory, Mohammed said. It's about continuing their legacy in a way they would be truly proud of. The launching event for the foundation stood in stark contrast to Susan's lavish gala. It was warm, meaningful, and full of purpose. The guests were not people drawn by status or wealth, but by empathy and a sense of justice. Mohammed's family, our close friends, my colleagues from the law firm, and compassionate people like Heather surrounded me. True family, in every sense of the word. As for Susan and Mandy, what followed for them could only be described as poetic justice. Things have gotten really bad for Susan, Heather said one afternoon over coffee. The video from the gala went viral. People all over the country now know her as the cruel stepmother who mistook a billionaire's wife for a driver. That footage became undeniable proof of their malice. The comments exploded with outrage and condemnation. Susan's salon has lost nearly all of its high-end clients, Heather continued. Apparently no one wants beauty advice from a woman with such an ugly character. She's completely blacklisted, especially among Boston's upper class. Things were even worse for Mandy's salon. Her Instagram was flooded with hate comments, and her follower count plummeted. Remarks like a beauty expert who can't hide her own inner ugliness and "You can fix your face, but not your personality" appeared in every post. But the most devastating impact was on Thomas's construction business. Much of its success had come from partnerships tied to my father's architectural firm. Now, the narrative has changed. They exploited a dead man's legacy while abusing his daughter. Several major projects dropped him immediately. Thomas has started turning to alcohol. I've even heard he drinks during the day now, Heather said with concern. He keeps saying, "If only I had protected Julia back then," over and over again, full of regret. Perhaps the most symbolic blow was when their luxury house was listed for sale. They could no longer afford the upkeep. Ironically, the value of that house had increased thanks to renovations funded by the inheritance left by my parents. Mandy's leaving Boston. She says she can't work here anymore. But wherever she goes, she'll always be remembered as that woman from the video. Meanwhile, my name was being spoken in very different contexts. The international attorney who overcame adversity. The brilliant woman loved by a Middle Eastern oil magnate. I had become a symbol of resilience and grace. Karma is real, Heather sighed. But I don't think you ever wanted this, did you? I shook my head. I never wished for their misery. I just wanted to live my life. But maybe what you do to others always finds its way back to you. In truth, I felt more pity than satisfaction. If they sincerely apologized one day, what would you do? Heather asked. I paused, then answered honestly. I might forgive them, but I don't think I'd let them back into my life. forgiveness and reconciliation, they're not the same. Looking back, I've come to believe that even Susan's cruelty played a role in shaping who I've become. Without that pain, I may never have developed the passion to fight for others, to understand their suffering. Today, I live with Muhammad in a penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor. And I've come to understand something powerful. The strongest families aren't built by blood. They're chosen. It's because of my past that I now know what truly matters. The foundation we started has now expanded nationwide. We support hundreds of children. I, once abandoned by my own blood, am now building families of my choosing countless ones. I've learned that true happiness doesn't come from others' approval. It comes from living in alignment with your values. And today, my life is the embodiment of those values.